Actually, you know what comes up to my mind is, and this is a conversation I've had with multiple people in context to some other issues and things, but the philosophically, the thinking here is, you know, as a kid, you're born, you're put in, you're in society. First, you're sort of in your home family unit. Then there's like the extended family. Then you go into society, go into school, and all that stuff. And we
Mm.
spend so much time and energy and put so much emphasis and scores and medals on learning
Mm.
about everything external, whether that's learning about science, mathematics, blah blah blah, to but there's very little effort made to learn about our brain, our body, our conscious, subconscious, and a couple of years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, I got into these books on like called the biology of belief and
Mm.
learning about. There's these couple of doctors, Dr. Bruce Lipton, and there's a couple of books, and they talk about things like when kids till the age of 7 are in like a theta brainwave state where they absorb
Mm.
the environment. For them, the dis- they're unable to distinguish between reality and their imagination. So when they're playing in the sandbox and imagining a sand castle, that's a real castle to them.
Mhm.
And at some point, adults uh, forget that. And
Mm.
after the so I did investigate, and because I'm just so curious about learning about just our own internal, like you said, internal operating system, and how and what triggers what, and how the subconscious works. And
Mm.
most of our life is just subconscious based on,
Yeah.
and so first part is that that there's so much effort on the external versus the internal. And I
Mm.
think culturally, I also noticed that because I've lived in India for like 20 years and now I live in Canada, for example, like a simple thing like mental health. In India, if you brought up the idea of mental health at work, nobody would give a shit. And this is sort of parlays into what you were saying about toxic work culture. I mean, you do have that here. I'm not saying North America is immune to toxic work culture, but having worked in India and having worked now
Mhm.
living here and working here, there's a huge difference. And just like when we say you have a headache, you have a broken leg, you're like, yeah, I'm gonna go see a doctor. But when it comes to something related to mental health or the subset where it's related to your sexuality,
Quality.
you know, there's so much taboo around these natural body needs and functions.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is sort of what came to my mind as you were describing some of these different elements, situations, context, scenarios, and of course, I want to do a slightly more deeper dive into some of these topics.
But I'm
Um,
curious to know what was the information regarding sex that you were given as a child? And what was your beliefs around that growing up?
Nothing. I think the growing up as a guy, I think there was a point at which the boys just got together, and we sort of this is how I kind of got introduced to it. And we're
Mm.
like, we heard of like this thing called like a blue movie or something, and we're like, okay, let's go to
Mm.
the video store. And it was
Mm.
basically all it was just porn. At no
Yeah.
point amongst even my friends or us we ever actually talked about, oh, how's your we didn't touch on any of this ever. Like I haven't
Yeah.
never I can think back, and the at best it would be about um what did you see in a porn movie,
Yeah.
and how much of that have you tried in real life?
Yeah.
That's pretty much
And,
it.
and I'm just curious to know,
So
so
shallow.
so the education of sex with respect to which is natural because most of sex education that we received as children was from porn, which is terrible. But how it kind of translated in our real life. that's where the disconnect really happens. And I'm curious to know what was mostly it's disappointing if the experience that you had. What were if you could go back and see what were the distinct differences that you could actually feel that, gosh, I wish I knew this. I wish somebody had told me this, coming from real life experience.
That's actually a really good question, and it's something I should actually think a little bit more deeply about now that you've told me given me all this more context and tools just by some of the stuff that you've told me. But let me give it a shot based on sort of on the fly kind of thinking, which is really not thought through. And that's the whole point of this conversation. We're not prepared, ladies and gentlemen. We're just freaking we're riffing. So if I think about it, well, early years, it was all just seeing porn. Obviously the first phase was just, looking at static images, magazines, because we didn't have access to. At some point, we're like, video. Oh my God. But I also read a couple of books in which they describe the act. And I was as a kid really fond of reading. And I read like a lot of Goosebumps. Of course, those are not sexual books, but I'm just using that as an example to point out that I used to love reading. I used to love reading like Hardy Boys, not Mills and Boons. But we used to make fun of girls who used to read Mills
that
and
was
Boons.
our erotica.
Exactly. And so, but one thing I do remember is that early on, I remember a massive distinction between what I would read in a book and how they would describe the whole, from soup to nuts. I'm using soup to nuts. How they would describe the whole experience from like seduction to foreplay, and how I would read it in a book, and then how I would see it in a magazine or a porn movie. So I was slightly aware, but not like in a very conscious, like self-aware, like the 40-year-old me versus obviously I don't even remember at what age I got exposed to. It's definitely at some point in school. But so what I do remember is that in my college days is probably when I first had some sort of a sexual encounter, and it was all over the place. It was horrible. I sucked. I had no idea what I was doing. And yeah, I think it seemed like, when you look at seals on the shore of an ocean, it just looked like two seals rubbing against each other. It was pretty bad. And I guess I was completely okay with that. I was like, you know what? I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. And but slowly, because I was I was lucky that I was seeing a couple of people, one after the other. I learned a little bit about how do I make the other person's experience great. I think for guys, it's like, okay, you should take a shower. You should smell great. Basics, right?
What about asking for what you need? Because
holy smokes, that is such a wild topic. That's something I think I've started to do now.